The last argument we had erupted just after Patricia was served the divorce papers, an event that marked a pivotal moment in our lives. Before we stepped into the courtroom, we both donned masks, pretending to be playing roles for each other. I acted as if I still wanted to engage in discussions, as though there were a way to salvage what was left of our marriage, even though I knew deep down that the door had slammed shut the moment the private investigator presented me with that damning photograph of her kissing Bradley Jacobson. By the 5th minute of the initial video recording, the very essence of our marriage was already interred, and I felt as if I were metaphorically shoveling dirt onto its grave. As for Patricia, I struggled to decipher what she was pretending. Perhaps she believed that her ongoing infidelity was still a topic worthy of discussion. Or maybe she clung to the notion that we could somehow reach a reasonable agreement to keep our marriage intact while she continued her affair with Bradley. Patricia, my wife, is a lawyer, and Bradley is one of her assistants. Finding ways to negotiate in completely unreasonable situations is her professional specialty. At home, it seemed she was engaged in this negotiation on a voluntary basis. The phrase, Matt, be reasonable, had been a constant refrain throughout our 25-year marriage. But after I served her the papers, she introduced a new phrase into her repertoire: fragile male ego. Matt, this isn't about me or who I am or am not sleeping with. It's about your fragile male ego, she said, her voice dripping with disdain and condescension. I could feel my blood boiling at that moment. How I loathed that phrase. It was evident that we weren't digging deeply into that final conversation before she decided to drop it. If you could see beyond your fragile male ego, you'd understand that this isn't a threat to you at all, she added, flashing me a smile that was meant to be reassuring, but only infuriated me further. I don't love him. In a few months, we'll both move on. You and I can still ride off into the sunset together. I had to give Patricia some credit. She was bold in her dismissal of our reality. As she spoke, she absent-mindedly traced her fingers along the stem of her favorite glass of unoaked Australian Chardonnay, which rested next to a manila folder on our kitchen table. That folder contained my divorce filing and several of the most incriminating photos the private investigator had captured. In other words, the Titanic had collided with the iceberg. The orchestra was playing "Nearer, My God, to Thee," and the women and children were being led to the lifeboats. Meanwhile, Patricia sat there, insisting that if I could just be reasonable and get past my fragile male ego, we might still make it to port. The reality was that Patricia thought we were still negotiating, but I had lost interest in resolving anything. I wanted the conversation to end. Patricia, let's pause for a second, I said, cutting her off mid-sentence. You keep talking about my fragile male ego, saying that if I can get past it, we'll be fine. What exactly do you mean by fragile male ego? She frowned for a moment, clearly a bit offended by my interruption. Well, it's very simple, Matt. You're afraid of competition. You're afraid that somehow you won't measure up, she replied, her smile returning, though it was laced with a hint of condescension. But, darling, you don't need to worry. You're my guy, my man. And what about Bradley? I asked, my voice steady, but filled with accusation. She blushed slightly, a telltale sign of her discomfort. Well, Bradley is just a toy, like a workout machine. I'm not planning to replace you or stop loving you. You have nothing to worry about. I gave her a slightly bewildered look, the kind that husbands often wear when they want their wives to feel superior, usually to evade some personal accountability. So, just to be clear, you think I'm worried that you're going to stop loving me or replace me with a younger model? She nodded, her gentle smile widening. Exactly, and darling, you have nothing to worry about. I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. And somehow this vulnerability is tied to the fact that I'm a man, I asked, incredulity creeping into my tone. She patted my arm gently, almost condescendingly. Oh, dear, it's not just you. All men have fragile egos, she said, her smile broadening further. Part of what we as wives do is support our men and keep your confidence up. I wanted to scream at her, to ask how in God's name sleeping with a 25-year-old was supposed to support me, but I knew that would only make her dig in her heels. I wasn't surprised that Patricia bought into that pop psychology nonsense about women being stronger than men. We had been dancing around that nonsense for years, but I was exhausted. We were almost at the end, and I was done dancing. Patricia, you've been using that phrase for a long time, I said, locking eyes with her. I've let it slide. One thing I've learned after 25 years with you is to pick my battles. But if there's anything I want to leave you with today, it's the understanding of how completely ridiculous this whole argument is. She started to object, but I pressed on. The reason people focus on the fragile male ego is that it seems abnormal. Think about those videos you've seen. How many times have you watched a guy get hit where it hurts the most? She nodded, contemplating. Plenty. It's funny, at least to women, because men always seem so strong, and yet this one thing is enough to make most of them fall down and vomit. Suddenly, the big, strong, scary man curls up into a ball, gasping for air. You get what I mean? Yes, she replied, though I sensed she was preparing to counter my argument. But watching a woman in the same situation isn't funny, is it? She nodded but seemed confused. But why not? If one person doubling over in pain is funny, why not the other? Because that's violence. I shot back. A man hitting a woman, that's violence. A woman hitting a man isn't seen in the same light. I shook my head, cutting her off before she could dive deeper into that rabbit hole. Never mind. We're getting off topic. The point is, watching a woman writhe in pain isn't funny because we're taught to see women as fragile and weak. So the idea of making a woman cry isn't strange or particularly humorous. I don't understand where you're going with this, she admitted, her brows furrowing. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. The point is, it's the same with the ego. When I go to work every day, my friends joke about my sexual abilities, my size, my belly, my thinning hair, anything they can find to tease me about. Now imagine if your friends did the same to you. Imagine walking into the office and immediately receiving comments on every area where you feel insecure. How would that make you feel? God, she said, her eyes widening. I can't imagine a woman ever treating her friend like that, and certainly not all the time. But that's exactly what happens with us big, strong men, I replied, my voice gaining strength. We shrug it off, throw back a comment, and get on with our day. But the truth is, the only place I allow myself to feel fragile and vulnerable is in this home. This is where I take off the armor, show my soft underbelly, and trust that you won't take advantage of it. What you see as my fragile male ego is just me letting my guard down in the only place where I feel safe enough to be fragile. Do you understand? Patricia smiled and nodded, but I could see her gathering her strength for another counterattack. But that's exactly the point, Matt. Here you're safe. You can be vulnerable. I'm not going to leave or throw away what we have because of a fling. I took off my glasses and rubbed the bridge of my nose, frustration bubbling inside me. You still don't get it, Patricia. I believed you when you told me I was the best lover in the world, even though I knew that objectively wasn't true. Hell, in the last 25 years, I've only had one lover, not exactly a wealth of experience. I could see the realization dawning on her face, but the conversation was spiraling out of control, and I could feel the walls of our marriage collapsing around us. I felt trapped in this moment, caught between the memories of the life we had built together and the stark reality of where we stood now. It was as if we were two ships passing in the night, each with our own destinations, but unable to chart a course together anymore. As I looked into her eyes, I saw not just the woman I once loved, but the stranger she had become, a reflection of everything that had gone wrong. My heart ached with the weight of our shared history, but I also felt an unyielding resolve to confront the truth, no matter how painful it was. And in that moment, the gravity of our situation hung heavily in the air, as the reality of our impending separation loomed over us like a dark cloud, threatening to unleash a storm that neither of us could escape. I believed you when you said that I was enough for you, that my size was perfect for you, that my body still excited you. I took you at your word, even when I suspected you were just boosting my ego. I chose to be vulnerable with you because I thought I could trust you. I can't believe you betrayed that trust, I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. Her eyes widened and she fell silent, taken aback by my outburst. I took a deep breath, attempting to regain my calm. About 6 months ago, I started noticing that you weren't being so careful with my vulnerability. I saw the way you spoke to me when I took off my shirt, the way you closed your eyes when we had sex. I picked up on the snide comments about needing to hit the gym or give up beer. She looked at me, stunned, and I continued. I noticed you stopped telling me about your day or asking about mine. You weren't around me anymore, even before you started sleeping with Bradley. I realized you were no longer a safe space for me. You weren't going to protect my vulnerability. Matt, her lawyer, was at a loss for words. I locked my gaze with hers, and I could see that her eyes were shining with unshed tears, and I knew mine were too. I tried to fight the swell of emotions threatening to break free. Patricia, I asked you out to dinner more often, complimented your clothes, tried to plan vacations just for us. I wanted to show you how special you were to me. I dressed better and started going to the gym, hoping you'd remember how special I once was to you. I looked down at my hands, fighting to maintain my composure. I couldn't let her see the tears welling up. I couldn't be vulnerable anymore, but it didn't work. You found reasons to cancel dinners, excuses why we couldn't go on vacation. When I complimented your clothes, I saw you worrying that I noticed you were dressing for him. And when I sent flowers to your office, I never even got a response. I looked up at her again. Then you started picking fights just to avoid having sex with me. That's when I knew I had failed. You forgot that I was special, and you were already on your way to no longer being special to me. I never picked fights to avoid sex, she protested, a hint of desperation creeping into her voice. Seriously? That's your takeaway? I said, exasperated. Can you just be honest? At least with yourself, if not with me? You've been pushing me away for 6 months. She glanced up at me briefly before dropping her gaze back to her hands, her charming hands that once captivated me. Anyway, yes, back then my ego was fragile. I spent a lot of time in the office with the door closed, mourning our relationship. I tried to put on a strong face, the one I wore at work, so you wouldn't see how deeply you hurt me. I started finding reasons to leave the house, to avoid spending time with someone who could hurt me and who now so clearly wanted to. She looked shocked, and I smiled slightly, gently patting her hand again. But you'll be glad to know that my fragile ego has healed. I found other things to occupy my time and other people who made me feel special. Her eyes widened in surprise. No, I didn't cheat on you, I clarified, smirking. But I did notice that some of the women at the gym didn't seem all that turned off by my body these days. By the time I had proof and was talking to a lawyer, you wouldn't have even known that my fragile male ego had ever been hurt. Are we done? I thought we were. I had said what I needed to say, and maybe, just maybe, she had finally heard me. I thought we could move on, but of course, I was married to a lawyer, and there was no such thing as a lost case. But Matt, there was never any need for this, she yelled. Yes, I admit I've been distracted lately, but I never stopped loving you. In my world, you were always number one. I'm sorry I didn't see how fragile you were, how much I hurt you. Patricia kept talking, weaving beautiful pictures with her words. But I wasn't listening. That word again, fragile. She still didn't get it, and I realized she probably never would. I wasn't trying to be nice anymore. Patricia, stop, I snapped. I think she could hear the anger in my voice, though I tried to hide it. I took a long, slow breath and exhaled. You still don't get it, do you? You still think this is all about my fragility, my fragile male ego, right? Honey, there's nothing shameful about it. All men, all people, Patricia, have fragile egos. We trust those we care about to protect them. Well, yes, of course, but men are especially fragile. she retorted. I mean, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I leaned in closer, as if I were about to confide something profound. I tried my hardest to keep the sarcasm at bay, but she wasn't making it easy. Patricia, I've spent most of the last 25 years trying to figure out how to be honest with you without hurting your ego. When you'd ask me if that lipstick suited you or if that dress made you look fat, I had to find an answer that wouldn't hurt your feelings, but also wouldn't let you leave the house looking like a crazed clown or an overstuffed sausage. Patricia blushed, her eyes widening. She wasn't used to this kind of honesty. Suddenly, I found it amusing. Patricia, when I say things like, honey, I'm not sure that lipstick goes with that blouse, or, wow, could you change? I'm not comfortable with our neighbors drooling over your chest all night. I was giving you an out. I pretended I wasn't sure of my words or that my fragile male ego was at risk. And do you know why I did that? She shook her head, still trying to process my words. It's because I didn't want to put your ego at risk. That's nonsense, Patricia fumed. I can remember several times when you were pretty clear about something not looking good. I smirked. Oh, I admit I messed up from time to time. I think we both remember what happened when I commented on your eyeshadow looking like that of an adulteress, or when I said, yes, that dress does make your butt look big. Those big hurt eyes, the cold, thanks for your honesty, and a week or two of freezing temperatures in the bedroom. I quickly realized that honesty is definitely overrated when it comes to giving my wife my opinion. So, you've been lying to me for 25 years, she exclaimed. Disbelief etched across her face. Let's just say I gave you a selective and carefully edited version of the truth. I told you that you were the most beautiful woman in the world, that your trips to the gym took a decade off your age, that even Venus de Milo couldn't compare to your backside. I gave you extravagant compliments just like the ones you gave me to show you how I see you, and in the process, to boost your fragile ego. My ego isn't fragile, I insisted. You have a fat ass. She looked at me as if I had just punched her in the chest. I smiled at her, continuing, you have stretch marks, your breasts have sagged, your hair roots are graying, and your teeth are yellowing. Those expensive creams you buy don't hide the wrinkles on your face or your double chin. Darling, it's time to think about aging gracefully because fighting it isn't working anymore. She gasped, her eyes widening as if I had hit her with a harsh truth. Lord Jesus, Matt, she managed to say. Patricia, remember the feeling you're experiencing right now. Think about it. Now imagine I told you I was sleeping with some pretty young thing at the office, someone 10 or 20 years younger than you, with a firm butt and full breasts. She's trying all her tricks on me because our relationship is still new, and she's just getting started with her game. Imagine I come home to you after being with her a couple of times a week. How's your ego doing? Feeling a bit fragile? Patricia looked a little pale, the reality of my words sinking in. Yes, she murmured. That's what you never understood, Patricia. I'm not blind. You're not the most beautiful woman in the world. Hell, I could probably walk out the front door and find half a dozen women in our neighborhood who are objectively more attractive than you. I looked at her again, but her head was still bowed, and I could see the tears streaming down her cheeks. You're not the most beautiful, not the smartest, and not the funniest. But to me, you were all of those things. You were the most beautiful, the funniest, the best. When I saw all your flaws, I also saw the life we lived together. Your breasts sagged because you used them to feed our children. You have a big backside because you carried them in your body. You have laugh lines because we laughed together. I looked at the roadmap of your body and saw the miles we traveled together. I cherished every one of those miles and the marks they left. She looked up at